Are you filled with fear, doubt, worry about the future of our country? Do you feel the urgency to act before it's too late? If yes, then this podcast is for you. It's time for us to confront the critical issues threatening our nation's fabric, our democracy itself, regardless of our political stance. If you are ready to face reality, handle the tough questions, and find real solutions, then here's your host, Debilyn.
Welcome to the Terrified Nation podcast. I'm your host, Debilyn. Can we save our country? Well, that's what we're exploring in this podcast series. And for me, the answer is a resounding yes, we can. It is our responsibility as citizens to be informed and active. I started hosting this show to explore alternatives to being afraid. And I offer new perspectives and framing about what is really going on. Together, we're learning how to manage our fear and our anger and our rage. And together, we're also learning how to find hope in a world that just seems crazy. It really is up to us, the citizens of this great, flawed, beautiful, and sometimes ugly nation, to live into the promise of our founders, each one of us dedicating ourselves to a better and brighter future. I like to start each show with a question that we'll explore. Today's question is, what are the big questions that keep you up at night? The reason for this particular question is that I've had 7 really big questions on my mind for some time. Like years. Maybe you too? Or am I the only one who thinks these deep, meaningful things and it keeps me up at night? But somehow I know that if we work together, we can shift our future to something that is life affirming. And what if we hosted a Zoom salon to talk about our questions together? I'll say more about this invitation near the end of the podcast. In the meantime, here are the questions that I'm on fire about, with the intention of doing my part to make our country and the world a safer and more compassionate place where we all have the opportunity to thrive. And part of why these questions have stuck with me for so long is because they're not easily answered. And yet, if we could answer them, our lives would be filled with deep connection, a community of belonging, and ways to contribute to others. So no solutions today, just questions and an invitation. Here we go. Question 1. Where do we find sacred, bigger than ourselves spaces to become our best selves? Now, many people are yearning for something that is sacred or meaningful or purposeful. And I'm not using sacred here in a religious sense, although it could be, but mostly like, what is a revered space? That might even be a better word, where we can participate fully in a humanistic way. We don't have to look good. We can show up in our sweats. Like, we need these spaces where we can be messy and learn and grow. And our current institutions that used to provide these kind of spaces have really disappointed us. From leader scandals to infighting to increasing violence, where can we be vulnerable without getting attacked? Where are the spaces to examine and explore safely how we might grow? We might change our minds. We might change our behavior or our beliefs without losing the esteem of our fellow Americans. I mean, this would be good for all of us to have such space. Question 2. How can eroded trust be regained? As institutions and leaders have disappointed us, the conflict profiteers have swooped in and built their business model by manipulating us to outrage and divisive thinking. We no longer trust our fellow Americans to be good-willed and neighborly by default. And there's also in this question, remembering that for some communities, societal trust has never been established. So, how can we become or be trustworthy citizens to each other? Let me tell you one thing, it's not arguing with people on Facebook. Question 3. What is the path to self awareness and why will people choose it? Now, this question has puzzled me the most for about 20 years because I love learning more about myself and the people around me. So I'm always surprised by how many people would prefer to be saved by a strongman style leader. And it feels irresponsible of me to give my power away like that. And part of why this doesn't make sense to me is that I grew up with a stepfather who felt tyrannical. And so I have this natural aversion to that leadership style. Now, the rules and restrictions that my stepfather placed on me as a child were outwardly reasonable. Not too much time on the telephone back in the day when we had a landline, not too much watching TV, have to be home at a certain time. But inside, his communication style felt very condescending to my sense of who I wanted to be. In short, I couldn't feel free while living with him because I was then and still am a wild-eyed dreamer with big ideas, a philosopher about why things should be different than they are, and a change agent to make it so. Of course, I'm many other things too, but these three were the keystone, I think, to why I had such a rough relationship with him. And I would note that moving into our political realm, that dictators and tyrants and strongmen leaders want conformity to their rules. They want unquestioning loyalty about their motives, and they like predictable outcomes. Now, had I tried to be who my stepfather wanted me to become, I would have felt victimized the whole time. And this type or sense of victimhood, of not being able to be freely who I am, happens in a lot of other people. This type or sense of victimhood might become unfashionable if we have a clear, fun, and safe path to integrate our responsibility and our freedom as citizens and allowing others to do the same. Phew, that one was a big one. Here's question 4. How might we foster generosity in spirit and in resources? This one has plagued me for the last, I want to say, 8 to 10 years, particularly, because I keep seeing this out of control greed and competition as being one of the primary causes or drivers of dysfunction in many of our institutions, our economies, and our day-to-day life. Greed has gone from being like, how do I make my own way and earn a good living for myself, to how do I win the game of the economy? And in this way, in this thinking of greed, it has increased to harmful levels. It is not good. There's a difference between wanting to be self-sufficient or take care of oneself and having a fair exchange, and wanting to have it all. Have it all is a more greedy concept. So how might we culturally, societally, economically make greed and the scarcity mindset behind it less pervasive? Definitely need to be less powerful. Greed needs to not equal power. And by itself, this is just another huge topic that we don't even have adequate language to discuss. All right, you still with me? Because here we are, moving on to number 5 of 7. Number 5 is, what are shared positive futures that we can identify and work towards? One of the byproducts of conflict profiteers is how they have filled our minds with bad futures, where it's really hard for some folks to imagine a positive outcome in our lifetime. And the stories about the end times are really dominant right now. There's no space for imagination of a positive future. And yes, this is why AmericanFuture.us was created and has been my focus for much of the last year. Remember, you can participate using the self-interview button on the homepage of AmericanFuture.us. See how easy it is for you to think of a positive future. All right, question 6 in the home stretch now. What would a life-affirming system look and feel like? So what do I mean by life-affirming? Well, to me, there are choices that we make that are life-affirming, that lift up our own and others' humanity, and there are choices that we make that are harm-causing, that somehow denigrate or make less than ourselves or other people. So in our current hustle-based mentality, where we kind of jostle for what we need, it's my estimation that we have lost sight of our shared humanity. And as the systems in the US have been optimized for productivity and profit, they no longer really serve our shared humanity, serve the people in some way, like somebody is losing in this system. And then you add in punitive incentives for not complying or overly complicated bureaucratic hurdles, and then people just begin opting out of mainstream society. And we lose our social cohesion when there are too many misfits to social norms. We may have become a nation of misfits already. Here we go, last one. What is freedom and how do we know it? Now, the freedom equation, which is a new tool I just developed, is a way for people to identify what freedom is for them, and then offers an easy way to see and add what is missing in our experience of freedom. Here's the equation. Freedom equals vision plus opportunity plus effort plus reward. So how does this work? Well, I'm going to use myself as an example. For me, freedom means being able to serve our nation as a thought leader, developing ideas in community with others, and then sharing these ideas with the public. Freedom for me means that I can dedicate my life energy to improving all of our lives, imagining a brighter future, and inspiring others to take that leap of faith towards the brighter future. So here's how that looks in the equation. Freedom, which is doing what I uniquely do in service to our nation, equals vision. For me, that's being a thought leader and identifying a shared future for the US, plus opportunities. This is communities or individuals that I collaborate and partner with, plus effort, doing the writing, the blogging, the podcasting, the collaborating, plus reward. This is where people compensate me for doing those things. So using this freedom equation, I am under-resourced in the opportunity and reward elements, because it takes a community of support for good things to happen and a base of support to meet my modest financial needs. So we'll post the formula in the podcast notes, and I'd love to hear how it works for you. This is a new tool that I'm experimenting with, so contact me if you'd like to be part of that experiment. Now, part of why I'm sharing these big questions with you is because after doing 20 years of political bridge building and pro-democracy work, I've started something new. And I find myself adrift and not quite certain where I fit in. So I have moved on from my previous work, but I'm not yet at home in my new work. I love the spaciousness of my life and how I can do things on my own time. But I miss the dynamics of working with a team. I love dreaming and questioning what's next, as you can tell from this podcast. But I'm also seeking a place where I know I belong. I also love the tension of these polarities, and I'm exploring them fully. As I do this, I am stepping into my own next stage of freedom, and it continues to be both exciting and really uncomfortable. So here we are near the end of this podcast, and I really want to circle back to that invitation I teased earlier for you to participate in one or two Zoom salons around these big questions. Will you sign up to discuss or even listen in? Now, part 1 will happen on Wednesday, November 20th, and part 2 on January 8th, 2025. Both salons will be held from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register for one or both of these calls at terrifiednation.com and click on the Events tab, then register for one or both calls. One more time, that's terrifiednation.com and click on the Events tab. Now, if you happen to be listening to this episode after January 8th of 2025, please just chat with me through the terrifiednation.com website. Whatever you are doing to make our nation better, thank you. Helping out in civil society, from natural disaster response to being a poll worker to coaching kids' sports or something else. We each have a role to play in strengthening our nation, of contributing to those bonds of trust and affection. And I am glad to be sharing the experience with you. So in closing today's show, I'd like to thank you, the listeners, for giving a damn about our nation. We may be frightened or angry today, but we can do better. We can find hope and save the USA. Join me next time.
So that's it for today's episode of Terrified Nation. Head on over to iTunes or wherever you listen to subscribe to the show. You can get advance notice of new episodes and bonus content by signing up. Head over to terrifiednation.com and join us on the next episode.